Great to be able to introduce the Net Zero Tside project to you today. Best place to start is to talk about the companies behind it and the organization behind it in terms of the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative. So the OGCI, as it's known, is basically a collaboration of 13 of the oil and gas companies, both international oil companies and national oil companies, CEO-led, established in 2014, and there to really focus on 6 themed work streams to tackle climate change, all the way from CCS to energy efficiency to transportation. Part of that was a climate investment fund, or the climate investments as a 10-year fund with over $1 billion to invest in innovative startups that have a material impact on carbon footprint, and with a particular focus on some industrial sectors as well. And so far, the Climate Investments Fund, which I'm a part of, has invested in 15 companies, made 15 investments covering 3 themed areas, from methane to CO2 intensity, and also CCUS. So CCUS is the piece that I'm really going to focus on today. And the first question is sort of, I think many of us really recognize already, why is CCS important? And simply put, it's essential. It's essential to get to the Paris Agreement goals. It's very much the core of the OGCI's thinking that in terms of, from an oil and gas company perspective, you need to have CCS as a deployed technology to enable us collectively to get to those goals from the Climate Accord. 7%, according to the IEA, is what is needed in terms of CO2 reductions by 2040. And it's got to be a significant, probably the most central tool in terms of decarbonizing industry. So Net Zero Tside, what is Net Zero Tside? It's essentially it's a project to decarbonize the industrial cluster in the North East, and to do so by as early as 2030. Four pieces of it. There is a local pipeline of gathering system, if you will, of CO2 in the Tside area that will be put in place. A pipeline, a compression and pipeline going offshore, taking the carbon dioxide in its dense phase to offshore storage assets, to proven, characterized geological storage sites in the North Sea, and deploying basically a substantial storage site, over 1 billion of CO2 capacity in the southern North Sea. So Net Zero Tside is all of that. It's essentially putting in that place and deploying the first full chain carbon capture use and storage project. So locally, the local CO2 gathering system I mentioned covers, if you're familiar with the Tside area, the Redcar to Bellingham, through Middlesbrough, the Wilton industrial site. So what you're doing is you're pulling together all of the local industry and connecting it up to a CO2 gathering system. And with all of these companies that are going to be part of this project, what you're doing is now you have the pathway to decarbonize hydrogen production, fertilizer production, petrochemicals, and biomass generation, and of course a new gas-fired generation plant as well. Why Tside? Why was Tside put forward? And actually, I echo the comment I heard in the previous discussion. All of these clusters need to go forward, absolutely, if we're going to get to these goals. But in this instance, why has OGCI basically selected Tside? And it was after a fairly comprehensive look at all of the potential locations that were available, and also bringing together a lot of the previous learnings that all of the oil companies had collectively pulled together from previous attempts at deploying CCS in the UK. Well, Teesside is, first and foremost, near storage, near the best storage sites in the UK. It's advantaged in the sense its ICI heritage meant that you've got a lot of collection of industry in a very concentrated state. They're used to passing industrial gases towards to one another. There is infrastructure in place connecting all of this industry. You've got a collection of some of the biggest emitters in the UK right there, and again, in a very concentrated state. And you've also got a very well-organized, cohesive industry representation, both politically through the Tees Valley Combined Authority, but also in terms of the organization of the industry itself. And I think going beyond that, you only need to look at Teesside's history, and it's got a very proud tradition of being an innovator, particularly around industry. How does it benefit? I can echo some of the previous comments about numbers that have been proposed. You know that there are benefits, whether there's some studies in terms of what a CCS industry could actually produce in terms of gross value added, in terms of jobs, in terms of export potential. There are some pretty large numbers there that far outweigh what are the perceived costs of CCS, which I think in the past has been the focus of deploying CCS. There is a huge benefit to CCS, which I think is, again, far outweighs the cost. It has the opportunity to decarbonize this cluster of industrial companies that I just mentioned a second ago. In terms of jobs, both indirect and direct jobs through construction, there's up to 4,000 jobs that obviously would be created by any project of this size, but also it underpins the current jobs that are obviously very important to Teesside going forward. I think in terms of timeline, a lot of these projects are squarely aimed at meeting the government's objectives, but in terms of 2050 net zero, but also in terms of delivering a decarbonised cluster by 2040. But in terms of this project, there is a well-prepared set of work streams such that the project aims to go into FEED next year, the middle of next year, with a view to financial investment decision by 2022, which would mean 2025 to 2026 operational projects. Now, a lot of that obviously is dependent on policy and the progression of policy, which we do see happening at this point in time, and therefore feel confident that we can actually position a project to deliver CCS in that time frame. I think lastly, just to talk about the future, and hopefully I'm within my time frame, where could this lead? I mean, again, I'll reiterate the point. All of these clusters need to go forward. CCS has to be a part of a future that allows us to get to these government targets of a decarbonised economy by 2050. The Northeast, and just to take a northeastern view, and I know that there are the other clusters will have the benefits from their perspective as well. But from a northeast perspective, you have a future in terms of allowing the CCS to deploy at scale, allowing clusters in the northeast, not just Teesside but also Humberside, to work together to actually decrease the costs of storage, to work together to start to benefit from a broader economy in terms of import and export from other countries, other geographies that will also, or plan at this point in time, to deploy CCS as well. And I think there's a bigger and broader future that can actually be developed on the back of it. I would just leave it there. Thank you very much.